the pressure is never put on Putin,
because
he's intimidated by Putin. So the pressure is always put on Zelensky. It's a schoolyard bully thing.
Yeah. Well, I said something to someone the other day who was saying, why are we supporting Ukraine? And, I used the World War II analogy. Okay, then why didn't we support Hitler?
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. Really quick before we get to the guest, I'm going to be doing a little holiday mailbag segment for Bulwark Plus members. It's a good time of year to give somebody in your life a Bulwark Plus subscription. You can go to thebulwark.com and get signed up for that. You get access to the Secret Podcast. You get access to JVL's Triad, the best newsletter in the business. And, now I'm going to be asking your more fun questions. We asked about this about a week ago for you to submit some questions. I'm going to tell you, I got some boring questions, and I got a lot of rants disguised as questions. It's a holiday mailbag. Send us some fun stuff, too. Send me some fun questions about your life, and I'll do serious stuff, too. The email is bulwarkpodcast@thebulwark.com. We're going to start doing it at the end of the show from time to time. So I'd appreciate it if you could, titillate me, make me laugh, send me some fun questions. All right. Today's guest, he served for 38 years in the U.S. Army and retired after being commanding general of the U.S. Army Europe. We're welcoming him back to the show, but it's the first time I'm welcoming him as an official member of the team. It's Bulwark military analyst Mark Hertling. What's going on, sir?
Hey, Tim, how are you doing today? It is great to be a part of your team and the Bulwark team and all the great people there that I've come to know over the last month. Super group of people.
Well, we appreciate your expertise. I also appreciate you running circles around some of the other folks on your output. Okay, I'm looking side eye at some of my other colleagues saying you got to keep up to the Hertling standard now, which I appreciate. Out this morning, I want to start here with you. Politico got an interview with President Trump in exchange for providing him with a new fake trophy. They named him the most influential man in Europe. Now you might see why Sam Stein was with us now. I want to read you one of the highlights from that interview. Again, this was about the most influential man in Europe award. Trump said this about our allies in Europe. Most European nations, they're decaying. They should be freaked out by what they're doing to their countries. They're destroying their countries and their people. The questioner asked, does that mean they won't be our allies anymore? Trump replies, well, it depends. It depends. Then the reporter asks again, do you think that many of them are just weak, or do you not really want to be allies with them? And he replies, I think they're weak, but I also think they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do. Not exactly a kind of a bold statement there in support of our European allies that have, worked with us on so many of the military engagements that you were working on. I'm wondering what your reaction is to that, given your experience, and what you think the implications might be.
Well, I know we're going to talk about the national security strategy later on, but, that's been my focus the last couple of days, trying to parse that thing. And what he's saying in the press now is not a whole lot different than what the document says about Europe. It's, in my view, it was very insulting. The Europeans see it the same way. I've been related to many of the countries in Europe from old colleagues in the military and also in their governments, and have been talking to them over the last few years. They were suspect during the first Trump administration. I think during the Biden administration, there was a pretty strong effort to try and rebuild that alliance and help them understand that we're a part of it. But in the national security strategy and in these words from this morning, it really appears like Trump has been very condescending across the board. He sees Europe, as he sees the rest of the world, as pawns of the United States. What do we have to do to get them to support us more? And he forgets that I think that there's 49 countries in Europe, 50 if you count Russia, and they each one have their own national security priorities and economic priorities and military priorities and diplomatic priorities. And yet he really seems to be wanting to funnel them into a transactional relationship where they're doing nothing but supporting him and his goals. That's not the way the world order works. So that's what concerns me the most about the strategy and some of the insults he's been leveraging against various countries.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and dig right into that national security strategy first, and then we'll kind of go around the world. And Trump had some comments in that Politico interview that I'll circle back to from our various entanglements. What is the national security strategy? Who cares? About a document on paper.
Yeah.
Just the government puts out a lot of BS, right? Like why does this matter?
Well, two things. It's interesting you said that because Elliot Cohen, who's at Johns Hopkins, one of their Emirati professors, who I know very well,
co-host of the Shield of the Republic podcast. We got him.
There you go, great guy, and he is exceedingly smart. He taught our son get a master's degree from there. He kind of made a flip comment that no one reads the national security strategy. And what he meant was no one outside the strategic influencers and the governments and all that. But it is a strategy, first of all, that provides nesting for other strategies like the national defense strategy, like the joint planning strategy, like the State Department engagement strategy. So it is a top-down base document that other people will take and then say, okay, how do we write our own strategy? And I'll give you an example, and I talk about this in the Bulwark article I wrote, that when I was the J7 on the Joint Staff, the guy in charge of war plans and transformation, when Bush's national security strategy came out after 9/11, we were pressured into writing a new national defense strategy, telling various combatant commanders around the world, here's what we got to do now. So it was taking that base document and saying, okay, what does this mean for the military? What does it mean for military acquisitions, for planning, for contingencies, for training? What are we preparing to do? Then when it gets down to the combatant commanders, the 4-star generals and admirals all over the world, they have to make their theater strategy based on the national strategy. So later on, when I was in European Command as the commander of the U.S. Army, I watched Admiral Stavridis put together the EUCOM, the European Command continental or regional security plan. And it told me what I had to do as the 3-star Army commander. Conduct theater security cooperation with a focus on certain countries, be prepared to deploy, to relook your contingency plans. So there's a bevy of actions that come out of the strategy. And that was one of my main comments about Trump's strategy, because he said strategy is a relationship between the ends and the means. And he forgot the middle thing, which a strategy also has to do, and that's the ways. How do you execute the things you're being told to do? And what kind of actions does it take to incorporate what you're trying to do for an end state?
Mark Warner was on with Bill Kristol on Sunday and was talking about just how striking it was to him, how little attention was given to China, for example, in the strategy versus how much attention was given to like micromanaging how Europe should manage oversight of posting on social media platforms, right?
Yeah.
Like how, and so like there was a lot of written about the culture war stuff in Europe and how Europe is getting out of step where MAGA wants to be, and relatively little, for, the things that are actual potential national security threats to us. So, either kind of riff on that, or were there other kind of elements of the strategy that you thought that really struck you?
Well, what I thought was the most interesting is he started the chapter on what we want, or how we're going to get some things, was the title of the chapter, and I'm pulling it up right now. He started off with a description of what was going on in the Western Hemisphere and the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And what he said in that section was, and I'll quote it, after years of neglect, the United States will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore Americans' preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. That was a shocker to me. There currently isn't a whole lot of threats. So he's looking at a strategy that refocuses on one area versus other areas in the world. Then he flowed from that to China. Then when he got to Europe and the Middle East, for Europe, it was just kind of a hand wave of how bad they were. and how they've declined and how the society in 20 years was going to be non-European. So there was some racist overtones in there. And it just, again, was a proclamation of America first. And what I found the most depressing of the whole thing, Tim, was the fact that there was, I think, one sentence in the entire document about building allies and using the strength of alliances. Everything is about what America will do and what America wants. And that may create some strategic end states. What I've found in this world, and after 4 decades in the military, if we're doing it alone, it's going to get real ugly fast. And he hasn't really looked at the concept of working with others. Now, I know Steve Bannon and Steve Miller probably say, well, that's globalization and you're a woke general and you don't know what you're talking about. But we can't do anything alone today because of supply chains, global interference, and emerging threats. The strategy really focuses on the state of the world as it is today and what he wants it to be.
I do have got to correct you on one thing. I think we do have a couple of allies that they're focused on. El Salvador, Qatar.
He brings a lot of connections with people in the Middle East because of transactional abilities. So are those allies, or are they just means of getting some kind of transaction and making America greater?
To your point on allies, this was Antonio Costa, head of the European Council, in response to the strategy, said allies do not threaten to interfere in the democratic life or the domestic political choices of their allies. They respect them. And you can just sense the tensions growing. And look, there's always been various tensions, and world leaders aren't always going to agree. In the Bush era, there were tensions with France, and you could go back. Overall, obviously, Obama had tensions with Israel, but this seems like an across the board of Trump trashing of the allies, particularly in Europe. And given your time there, our colleague Jonathan Last also wrote this week about how NATO, it's kind of leading to a crumbling of NATO. Just peeking behind the curtain here for people in our staff meeting on Monday, you indicated you might not be all the way on JVL's view on that, so we can explore that a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, what you think the implications are in particular with that, like the allied relationships with Europe, threats to NATO, and how they're reacting to the strategy.
Yeah, the folks I'm talking to in Europe, both the military and a few government officials from various countries, especially the Baltics and the Nordic countries, who are sort of the new NATO, with Sweden and Finland joining recently, they have taken an onus of kind of building a block. They call it the Baltic Nordic 8. In their northern region, which didn't exist before, because they realize the threats they face. But what I'd say is when you talk to them, they will tell you they are angry when you finally get into a 3-beer conversation. The first part of it is politeness and respect and all that because of past relationships. But by the time the 3rd beer is down, they're talking about how pissed they are at America and how they don't think we're going to recover from this very well. I tend to disagree with that. I think the alliances will come back together because of emerging threats. And that was the commentary I made about JVL's comments, that I think we're going to attempt to rebuild our relationship once this administration is done, because we're going to realize we need it more than they need us.
Obviously, we want to spend some time in Venezuela, but let's talk about what the latest is with Ukraine and kind of the more acute impact of that fraying kind of alliance between us and Europe. Ukraine, has gone through a period that's, I think, a little bit shaky, I guess. Since the beginning of this war, look, you were on this very early. I remember you wrote the days after Russia invaded, how people would be surprised by how strong Ukraine's preparation will be and how weak the Russian military will be. And that is really borne out, in the ensuing years. But Ukraine lately is dealing with some corruption issues, with related to Zelensky's chief of staff. Russia is having some successful attacks on infrastructure. How do you kind of see the state of play there, and what's needed?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing you brought up was the corruption issues, because that's always been an issue in Ukraine. The very first time I went to Ukraine in 2008, I think it was, I took the Secretary of the Army with me because he wanted to see how our alliance partners were working together. So when we were flying up there, he said, "So tell me about Ukraine." And I said, "Well, it's a very corrupt country." And he goes, "Well, wait a minute, Hertling," he says, "you're taking me to a corrupt country? Why are we doing that to show interoperability?" And I said, "Because they have potential. Their corruption is based on what's left over from the Soviet regime, and they're trying to get through that, but it is a culture that's going to be difficult to overcome." My counterpart in Ukraine, a guy named Colonel General Vorobyov, one of the first things he asked me to do with him as a partner was help him get rid of the old Soviet generals that were in his army. Which was fascinating. He told me, he said, the government's corrupt. And this was in 2010. He said, the government's corrupt. They're working on it. And in fact, they had an approach to do that. He said, but I want to make the army better, faster. And he did. Every once in a while, a guy popping up in the Ukrainian cabinet or society that's corrupt and taking money. The only response I would have is, well, how many corrupt Americans have we seen in the last week doing exactly the same thing, in terms of getting pardons or stealing money or stealing cash or, whatever, name that tune. Every government's got corruption if it allows it. So I'm not excusing it, but it happens.
I take your point that there's going to be corruption in these sort of situations. It's not to excuse it. It's just kind of the reality. Mm-hmm. I do wonder if these two things are related, though, where Zelensky starts to get underwater politically because of concerns about corruption around him, while they are, a little bit more vulnerable on the military side than they have been. If he's feeling more politically vulnerable, that might make Zelensky act differently. Vis-a-vis these negotiations, the pro-Russia negotiations, than he may have months ago. I don't know what does that.
And what you see though is, I think Zelensky was willing to adapt. He wanted to see what Trump was going to do for him or with him. It didn't happen. It's been swayed both ways by this crazy negotiating team that has no understanding of either the culture of Russia or the culture of Ukraine. And that's gone back and forth. So now I think he's turning more toward the major European partners and saying, how can you help me out? And he's seeing that they are going to give him help because they are also breaking from the United States based on some of these insults and what they're seeing based on the corruption of the negotiating team. I mean, sweet Jesus, you've got Witkoff and Kushner and others who are working land deals as opposed to true peace treaties. And then you've got Kellogg, who should know better, saying some crazy things about what Ukraine is looking for. And, it's interesting, Tim, because you mentioned my comments early on in the war. I was in my hotel room and across the street from CNN when the war started because they asked me to come there. And I listed 5 different strategic objectives of Putin. And 4 of them had to do with Ukraine and breaking their will, taking their capital, destroying their army, taking the Black Sea ports. The 5th one was further dividing the United States and further dividing NATO. The only ones he's succeeded on is that last one. Ukraine continues to stay strong, whereas we're the one that's kind of faltering a little bit.
All right. I have not bought a single Christmas present. Not one. December 9th. Concerned about that. If you're a last minute shopper like me, you know the feeling. Ideas are running low. Shelves are empty. Well, Aura Frames is a solution with a gift that feels personal and, will be sitting on their desk all year long. Aura Frames is a good gift for a family member. I think the traditional thing to think about with Aura Frames is you want to give it to the great aunt or the grandmother or the great grandfather or the uncle, somebody that lives in a different city, so they can see the pictures of the grandbabies all year long. It's a great reason. That was what I did when we first had Aura Frames as a sponsor last year, 2 years ago. Who the hell knows? Time is a flat circle. And they loved it. The grandmothers love it. I can tell you that. But it also, I think it can be a fun gift for friends, for colleagues. You can give the Aura frame to a work friend and send them pictures of, work trust falls past, or to your buddy, or to one of your high school or college friends with like an old cache of pictures from when you guys were younger and getting into trouble. Anyway, long story short, Aura Frames works for everybody. You can upload unlimited photos and videos. You just download the Aura app and connect to Wi-Fi. You can preload all the photos before it ships. They get it out of the box and they've already got it. They can, cry or laugh depending on what kind of photos you sent them. You can personalize the gift. You can share additional photos and videos effortlessly from your phone all year long. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling carver mat frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code BULWARK at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code BULWARK. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast. So order yours now and get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Out of folks like your successors who spent so much time in Europe and worked with the Ukrainian military and understand the enemy and the threat from Putin, how do these guys stomach listening to an outer borough real estate man talk about how wonderful Putin is? I like that whole the breakdown between like having Witkoff and Kushner trying to rig this has got to be just unbelievably galling to the people doing the actual work.
It is. And if I were to open up my behind the scene DMs and text messages with former colleagues, you would see some of that. It is mind boggling what those of us who understand the continent see in terms of individuals who are really neophytes at dealing with some of the Europeans. I mean, even Secretary Rubio, the first press conference I saw him in, I just thought to myself, he's making every single mistake that any congressional delegation makes when they come to a foreign country. They're being condescending and, just doing things that are not an understanding of how masterful, I guess, Putin and Lavrov are. And they've been in command of that country for 20 some years. And here you've got these new guys coming in thinking they can bowl them over with a land deal. It's just ridiculous. And I think Zelensky sees that, but he didn't want to insult anybody because he realized a lot of the United States support was helping him. And that's the essence of what's going on there.
Yeah, you'll be shocked that in the Politico interview, Trump, again, is kind of dumping the blame on Zelensky, saying that he feels like we've got a good deal on the table and he wishes Zelensky would consider it more closely. So it's just time and again throughout this whole process, he vacillates back and forth between, being fully in Russian propaganda mode, and then like some people bring him back on side, and he gets annoyed that Putin isn't doing what he's asking for, but like it's never, the pressure is never put on Putin, because he's intimidated by Putin, so the pressure is always put on Zelensky. It's a schoolyard bully thing.
Yeah. Well, I said something to someone the other day who was saying, why are we supporting Ukraine? And, I used the World War II analogy. Okay, then why didn't we support Hitler? Even though we were told that he was taking the Sudeten land and he was killing Jews in the Holocaust, and, he was going to kind of go into hiding for a couple of years while he rebuilt his army and then reattacked into Belgium. Would you be okay with that? Because that's exactly the mode of operation of President Putin. That's what he does. He's a criminal, a crook, and a dictator. And he just wants more land and more property.
So I talked about the Witkoff and kind of how military generals and experts must feel about like dealing with his clownishness. That is also true for the sitting Secretary of Defense, as a former Weekend talk show co-host. There's some buzz out there in the right-wing media. You have reason to believe that they would have insight into this stuff, since it's all their people that are on the inside, that there is an internal battle happening at DOD, and I think Laura Loomer called it a coming coup attempt with Daniel Driscoll, the Army Secretary, trying to displace Hegseth. I'm wondering what your sense is of Hegseth's standing at this point with the military folks. It's kind of noteworthy. Trump still had his support and he's still been very visible, but like he hasn't been included. He's been left out notably of some of the military meetings recently.
I was surprised when Secretary Driscoll of the Army went to Ukraine and Geneva. That's very unusual. And where was Hegseth during this period? I guess there was something else going on at the Pentagon, or maybe a push-up, pull-up contest or something. I don't know, something more important. But it just seems
Why
strange.
is it unusual? Just for people who don't understand, why would it be unusual for the Secretary of the Army?
Well, the Secretary of the Army is responsible for manning, equipping, and training the Army. He's not all that involved in diplomatic affairs or defense with allied nations. I mean, the secretaries go out and see things and all that, but They normally focus on what the Army is doing in Europe as an example. But he was at the table for the diplomacy action, and that just really is kind of unusual. I mean, even Secretary Driscoll does not have a whole lot of experience in Europe, does not have a whole lot of experience with warfighting. I think he only spent 3 or 4 years in the Army. So it's those kind of things that give you pause. Having said that, Secretary Hegseth doesn't have a whole lot of experience with Europe either, or how to do diplomacy. So maybe it was better that they kept him at home. I mean, you look back at the previous administration, when Secretary Austin would go places, he had the immediate gravitas of being a former 4-star general, knowing the area of operation, knowing what the military does, and he represented the Defense Department well. I don't think we see the same thing in Hegseth, other than lethality versus legality.
It's interesting. Like, it was not so long ago that the Secretary of Defense wasn't supposed to be a uniformed military officer. And like now we go through this phase where you had Mattis kind of in the first Trump term, and people are kind of like, okay, we're going to let this go because we want to have an adult in the room around Trump.
Right.
And then Biden continues that with Austin. And now I guess some discussion of Driscoll. Do you have any thoughts on just sort of that change and how things are now and whether there's any risks there?
Yeah, I think there is risk in that, because it sort of blends the civil military relationship. And here I am talking and dissing a little bit on the political masters who are conducting these engagements. And I shouldn't be doing that. I'm trying to be respectful, just making an assessment. But when you put someone in that position, they need to be separated from the demands of the military, but at the same time understanding what the military does. That organization of the Defense Department is huge. It's the second largest cabinet with close to 3 million employees, if you want to call them that, and worldwide obligations. So you got to have somebody that's pretty savvy. And I think Mattis was a good choice, even though a lot of people pushed back on that. And Trump understood soon why it wasn't a good choice for him, because Mattis was kind of given the example. I think Austin was a good choice to repair relationships. And that's what Biden chose him to do more than anything else, and get the military out from under what had happened in the first Trump administration. We're going to need the same thing again after this administration with another Secretary of Defense. Not saying that it requires a military guy, but it better be somebody who really understands the organization and is smart enough to realize that it's got to be run as a business too.
All right, let's go down to our war, non-war in Venezuela. I don't know what we're calling this. We're just bombing boats with no official declaration of war. The big news of the past couple of days has been, the briefing that happened of 6 members of Congress over this strike. What are we calling it? We're not calling. You're saying we shouldn't call it a double tap. We're calling it a restrike. What are you saying?
Restrike, re-engagement. Yeah.
A secondary restrike in the Caribbean. The big takeaway from this is that everybody, all of the Democratic members who saw this, basically said that it was totally inappropriate and shocking to watch the video. Some of the Republicans who saw it are not commenting. Tom Cotton is the one who is commenting, and he's spinning a story where these 2 guys were apparently in the water and were about to turn over the boat that had been bombed, get back in it, go meet up with some friends of theirs, and then bring deadly drugs to America to kill millions of Americans. I'm wondering what you think about Tom Cotton's assessment and what we've heard so far from the Hill.
Well, it just surprised me that it was so one-sided and so lacking in common sense. If you're with 11 of your buddies and you've just been blown up and 9 of those 11 are killed and your boat's capsized and your drugs are floating away, you're not going to be thinking about continuing the mission. Having been blown up myself, that's the last thing on your mind. You just want to, kind of get the unrung bell and continue the operation and get to safety.
Pause here for a second. Tell us about when you were blown up.
Nah,
let that slide.
I was involved in an IED blast in 2003. So we were in a Humvee, and when I say blown up, I was not physically blown away.
I know.
But it was, it spilled my coffee. Let's put it that way. And everybody that was in the truck was the same way. But when you experience that kind of explosion right next to your vehicle, and in our case, none of us were harmed. It just blew out the windshield, blew off some of the side panel and stuff. It still rocks your boat, no pun intended. So when you see 9 of your 11 friends killed, your boat's upside down, whatever you're trying to do is not and by the way, this is the first time it happened. So these guys are like, what the fuck just happened to me?
That's a great point. This is not like one of the ones where now some of them have got to be expecting it or concerned about it.
Yeah, if I'm going out on a boat, I might get blown up. This one was like, what in the hell just happened? So that's an issue. But I don't understand why Senator Cotton would do something like that, because he's a military veteran. He should know better. It's just dumb. That's all I can say. Or there's an agenda in there somewhere, which I think is probably the case.
I talked about this a little bit with Bill. There's definitely an agenda yesterday, but now that we have a military expert, we should at least somebody with experience. Like let's just even take them at the story that they're telling, right? Just to try to even understand what would possibly be inside the minds of Hegseth and the Admiral that's in there, Bradley. And it's like, so they bombed this boat. There are 2 guys in the water. Allegedly, they're saying that there's another boat that they're going to meet up with, and that they're worried about these guys. Like, even taking them at face value that is what happened, wouldn't the right thing to do then be, okay, well, let's interdict them? Who is on the other boat? What kind of information can we gather? Or wouldn't there be a rationale for interdicting them, interviewing them, grabbing them out of the sea, rather than doing what we did?
There would be very good rationale, because number 1, you're not committing a crime. Number 2, you're gaining intelligence. Number 3, you can pick up any drugs that are still remaining and put them in your Coast Guard cutter. And that's the thing, Tim. It's not like we don't have any experience with this. We've been doing Coast Guard interdiction of boats on the high seas probably for 20 or 30 years. And in fact, it was interesting because when I was a 1-star general, I went on a trip to Key West, and we literally watched a Coast Guard vessel launch an aircraft because they had on their radar or sonar, whatever, they had a boat that was coming in, a cigarette boat, and a Coast Guard cutter can't keep up with one of these go-fast boats. So they launched a helicopter with a sniper hanging off the side, shot out the engine, got out, captured the boat, captured the people who were transporting the drug, took all the drugs, and it was an interdiction effort, and they likely got a whole lot of intelligence about where the drugs came from, who the cartels were, who these members were, and in that case, frankly, all of them were just mules looking to get paid. They weren't drug runners, they were just people trying to get a salary. And that's what happens a lot in combat. That's what we do. So I truthfully don't understand why we brought special operators into this to launch drone aircraft and destroy boats and kill people, other than performative politics. It doesn't make any sense.
It's also telling you say the performative politics, and another piece of evidence that they're doing this for performative politics is that they're releasing all these videos, which is not standard operations that we've seen in the past in situations like this. I mean, for time to time, but just to release the video of every strike on these boats. But they are not releasing the video of that restrike, of the subsequent strike, and even though Trump had promised, and I think that tells you a lot.
It does. And what I'll tell you too, to carry this on with Secretary Hegseth the other day saying, oh, we're going to sanitize it and we're going to clean it up to make sure it's, there's no sources or methods or tactics, techniques, and procedures is what he said. What I'll tell you, again, I go back, this attack happened on the 2nd of September. Knowing how military people do things, there's a log. There's, the film is already sanitized. There's nothing to look at other than the strike based on audio, video, and written documents or typed documents that says, here's exactly what happened on a TikTok, the date to date to date to date. So I don't know why it's taking so long. This thing happened 3 months ago. It's either releasable or it's not. And it's just an excuse to not release it. That's my view of it. I mean, every operation I ever conducted, a strike against a facility or a group of people, when I was a division commander in Iraq, we had the film, we had the log, we had the input to a computer and what we were doing. We had the rationale for why we were doing it. And right next to us, there was a lawyer saying, yeah, we're okay. So it ain't that tough, is what I said before. Here's what I think too, if I can continue on, because today is the most interesting part of this, because you not only have continual debate about what Admiral Bradley said. Today, Admiral Holsey, who is the Southern Command commander, whose area of operation this was occurring in, who had a fight with Secretary Hegseth and by all reports, and his lawyers had a discussion that was contentious with the Department of Defense lawyers about what was going on. And suddenly he was asked to retire in the middle of October. That testimony is going on in Congress today too, with a much smaller group.
Talk to me about the dynamics there with Holsey, because that's pretty strange. Like, he was in that position running Southcom for about a year, and he's pushed out. You mentioned he's black. I think it's relevant in the context of Hegseth's anti-DEI campaign, where you really do see a trend of the types of people that have been pushed out of DoD. How do people inside the military, you think, process that? Or like, how strange is that for maybe it's less strange than it seems. Like, a new administration comes in, they want their own people. Explain what you think happened there with Holsey.
Well, knowing a little bit of background of him, he had a pretty fascinating career. He's done a lot of good things. But before he was the commander of Southcom, he was the deputy commander of Southcom as a 3-star admiral, a vice admiral. Then he was promoted, took Southcom as a command about 10 months ago. I think he took command last October. So it's been less than a year. Whenever you have someone who retires with less than a year in a new position, what you've got to understand is when admirals seemingly to the American people are promoted and given a new rank, they are actually assigned to a job that has that rank attached to it. When he went from 3-star to 4-star, deputy commander to commander, he was then promoted for the position he was in. When you retire with less than a year in duty, you're not going to retire as a 4-star. Now, he may get an exception and, he'll retire as a 4-star general, but it's just interesting that he was asked, linked to disagreements with the operations in Southern Command. What you also have to understand is a combatant commander or any commander is responsible for their entire area of operation. When special operators come in, like Admiral Bradley as the JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command commander, come into that area, or when the CIA comes into that area, they still are connected to the combatant commander, Holsey. So
when you say connected, do they report to him? How does that work exactly?
They coordinate with them. They coordinate with them. So what I think you're going to see is a 2-pronged chain of command between SecDef, between the special operators, and SecDef to the Southern Command commander. And that's going to be confusing in of itself. And when what I believe is going to show up in testimony is Admiral Holsey is going to say, hey, look, this is my area of operation. I didn't agree with the approach. I was telling them I didn't agree with the approach. I thought there was some activity that they shouldn't be doing. And because I voiced my concern about either legalities or approaches, I was asked to retire.
So how unusual is that? That's what I'm trying to understand. Go back to your experience in Iraq or whatever. There had to have been, high-ranking military officials that didn't agree with a strategy or an approach that Rumsfeld had put forth or would express it. How does it usually work in that sort of situation?
Well, you provide your advice, your best military advice. You fight, if you will, for your point of view. But then when the civilian decision maker says, no, here's what we're going to do, you salute and say, okay, I'll execute it to the best of my ability, unless it's unlawful or illegal.
I guess I've been wondering, watching through all this, there's this big hullabaloo about that video that Mark Kelly and Jason Crow and others put out, Slotkin, Democrats in Congress, talking about how if you're in the military, you do not have to follow an illegal order. And it was interesting to me, that video came out like a couple days before all of this reporting. And I don't have any inside information on this, but I do wonder if there was scuttlebutt about this, and it's hard for me to determine where the line is, right? Like there's some obvious examples, it's like you're a soldier and they're like, shoot a U.S. citizen in the street, like that's an illegal order, you shouldn't do that. Like, where does this Venezuela war not war fit in that, what are the gray areas? Because it's not even a war. We don't even have a declared war. We're just bombing boats, right? So It seems like the whole operation is illegal. But I wonder what you think about all that.
I think I don't know certainly what was in the mind of the 6 legislators that made the video. You could debate whether or not it was appropriate. My contention is it was made mostly for individual units who were being asked to go on the streets of the United States cities. I think that's who it was geared toward. But it was also made toward the potential of this war, not war in Venezuela. I don't know. I mean, Mark Kelly and I are friends. We've texted each other a couple times. He's never told me what drove them to make this video. But it's interesting to me that all of this seems to collide at the same time. But it was just a reminder. Some in the military will say, well, that's unnecessary. Everybody is taught not to obey unlawful or illegal orders. But it sure came at a time when it seemed a lot of those kind of orders might have been teetering on the edge for commanders who were being asked to do things that maybe they shouldn't be asked to do.
Yeah. Think about where they go from here. There's a CNN report yesterday that the administration's quietly building plans for if Maduro is ousted. This isn't really surprising. I'm sure the military is building plans for lots of stuff. Trump, in that Politico interview today, said he doesn't want to rule in or out expanding the war onto land in Venezuela. He said, I don't want to talk to you about military strategy. Then he did also say they're open to expanding the use of force in their fight against quote unquote narco terrorists to include Colombia and Mexico. I mean, at some level, Admiral Holsey's maybe lucky that he's out of there. I hope he gets his 4th star. But the Southern Command situation is pretty uncertain at this point. I mean, what do you kind of make about all of that and all the scuttlebutt about what might be next?
Well, first, regarding Admiral Holsey, he is retiring, I think, at the end of this month. He is still the commander, but when he leaves, I don't know of anybody who's named to replace him right now. So the question is going to be, are you going to have an acting commander? And that's always challenging. But the second thing,
so is he so he's overseeing these strikes then, or they've gone around him basically? Or
I think they've basically gone around him. That's my contention. The CNN reporting, they've got a Pentagon reporter that's getting scuttlebutt. Hey, contingency plans are made to do X, Y, and Z. The fact of the matter is the military is always asked to do potential plans, and they normally give a couple of courses of action. They can't say, no, we're not going to give you any plans to invade Venezuela. They have to provide, here are some options if you want to invade. And then when they give those plans, they said, and here are the downsides or the upsides to doing each one. Okay, that happens all the time. So anytime you hear from the media that, the Pentagon's planning to invade Venezuela, no, they're really not. They're being told to commit plans for the president or some civilian authority. It would be, in my view, a huge mistake to go into Venezuela. It's a huge country. It's bigger than Ukraine. It's got a population of 31 million people. It's got deserts and mountains and terrain. When you go into a place like that, especially if you're thinking regime change, much like we have in past couple of wars that I was involved in, there are some on the civilian side that say, just replace the president and get the new guy in there. Well, what we've seen when you conduct regime change operations, it's a whole lot messier than people think it will. And we end up staying there decades with a lot of lost soldiers. At the same time, too, going back to our discussion on national security strategy, if Colombia is now involved and Honduras and others are now thinking of being invaded too by the president, these are countries we've had a counter-narcotics campaign with for 30 years, and they've been pretty successful for the most part. So I don't know why we would be re-invading Colombia, because they've kind of overcome most of their drug problems. There's still drugs coming out of there, but it hasn't overwhelmed the government like it used to during the narco phase of their democracy, as it will.
This might be a dumb question, because probably the answer is it's different for different people. But it's hard for me to get into the minds of military folks who are stationed or involved, in the Western kind of theater right now. Because like at some level, this is maybe going to sound glib, but like you want something to do. And like it's, you know what I mean? Like you didn't join the military to do nothing, I guess. Most people didn't. But then on the other hand, it's like all of a sudden out of nowhere, you have this ridiculous kind of mission where you're bombing these boats that are allegedly coming from America, but really seem to be maybe going to the Caribbean islands and then to Europe. What do you think it does, like something like this does to the psyche of people that are in the military?
I can only give you an example, Tim. I was in the Pentagon on 9/11, and was actually, it's the only time I've been assigned to the Pentagon. I happened to get there a month before the attacks. We watched and supported the attack into Afghanistan to get rid of Al-Qaeda. But then when the drumbeat started about invading Iraq for a variety of reasons, the people on the Joint Staff were pretty split, not evenly so, against going into Iraq and opening a second front. So when you present, and I was one of those, as the chief war planner, saying we should not do this. It's dumb to open up a second front, and we don't have good information. But we went. And during the next 11 years of that war, either myself or our two sons and our daughter-in-law were back and forth into Iraq in a war that none of us thought was, probably the best thing to do. But once you get in there, you do your very best to execute the mission of the civilian authority. That's why it's so important to not have people in elected positions that do crazy stuff with the military and they think it through. Which brings us back to Venezuela. I think part of the issue with Admiral Holsey, the Southern Command commander, is he had probably been in Southern Command for a total of about 5 or 6 years of his career. He knew what a successful drug policy should look like. He knew how to coordinate the actions of other governments. He knew what it would take to do a counter-narcotics campaign, and he probably expressed those views to Secretary of Defense. And yet we have a Secretary of Defense that just wants to come in with aircraft carriers and special operators and start bombing drug boats. So that's where the contention lies within the military, of trying to give your best military advice and see it overrun by people who may not know about the area as well as you do.
Well, we'll be watching for Admiral Holsey's testimony closely and listening for it. So I'm sure we'll be grabbing you on YouTube over on the Bulwark Takes feed once we learn more for what he has to say. Lastly, you wrote a really beautiful piece about Sarah Beckstrom, who's the National Guard, West Virginia National Guard member that was killed in Washington, D.C., just tragically. And folks should go to the Bulwark, and we'll put the link here to read the whole thing. But I just, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of kind of how you reacted to that based on your experience.
I've shown this before. Let me reach over my desk. I've got a desk on my or a box on my desk that says "Make It Matter" on the front of it. Inside of it, if I can open it and show it to you without dumping pictures, are the cards with pictures of soldiers, the 253 soldiers that were under my command in Iraq on a couple of deployments, or when I was an assistant division commander under another commander, Marty Dempsey. I look at that box every day, take a couple of cards out, think about where they would be today. When you have people who raise their hand and say they're going to support and defend the Constitution, and they know that there's a possibility that they might sacrifice everything they have to include their life when they do that, even if you don't know the soldiers that were killed, like Specialist Beckstrom was, you have a connection to them. You understand what they've gone through. You understand that they may be performing this mission when they really didn't want to, but they were sent there. And that seems to be the case with her, although she was making the best of it. She had a family, but she was also a young soldier. She was only, I think, 20 or 21. She joined the Army when she was 18. And on this particular mission, one of the things I pointed out in the story was that she had taken the pre-Thanksgiving Day duty the night before Thanksgiving because one of her soldiers who was going to perform that duty had an opportunity to go home or be with loved ones or whatever. I don't know the details. So she took it for another soldier when she didn't have to on Thanksgiving weekend. It just tells you what kind of people they are, these young folks who will give more than what they're being asked to give, and they always do it. So truthfully, I thought, just offering some of my perspective after seeing so many of our soldiers killed in action, and that doesn't even mention the wounded, talking about what they sacrifice and how good they are, and how America sometimes doesn't realize how much these young people should be given in terms of respect and loyalty. So that was the purpose of writing that article.
Well, we appreciate it very much. Appreciate having your perspective and expertise and experience here, as I think it's going to be extremely relevant going into 2026, no matter what happens in Venezuela and Central America, but also potentially with the use of military in the streets here in the U.S. And so we'll be having you back again soon, and people should be going to thebulwark.com to check out your writing. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Have a great day, too.
All right, everybody else will be back here tomorrow for another edition of the podcast. See you all then. Peace.